Christina Bray. I am the SVP for Governance, Risk, and Compliance for the cyberspace for the new Truist Bank, formerly BB&T and SunTrust. We merged back in December, so it's been an interesting time.
Excellent. Daniel.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Argandona. I'm the founder of the Capital Security and Risk Group, and happy to be here. Thanks very much, Matt.
Absolutely. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Cahill.
There we go. I apologize for the video issue. My name is Carl Cahill. I'm the Director of Cyber Defense at Ahold Delhaize. Going to have a lot of fun today. Looking forward to being on the panel.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you all. I think we've got a nice mix. We've got folks from the corporate side, folks from professional services, folks that have been in this field for quite some time in a variety of capacities. But so I'm looking forward to the blend of perspectives and perhaps maybe educate our audience a bit on what we're seeing, what we're going to experience, and give some people some kind of real-time view of what to expect going forward. So take us through, we've all talked about what the new normal means and the definition of the new normal. I personally could do without that vernacular these days. It's kind of overkill, but we're all adapting, right? We're all working, at least most of us are working virtually. It certainly has disrupted a lot of things. It's certainly created a new set of priorities for most organizations from a technology standpoint. It's debunked a lot of the views that we can't be decentralized, that we all need to be Monday through Friday in an office. But from a risk management perspective, the changes to the threat landscape have forced organizations to shift their priorities. So tell us about what you're experiencing, Christina, from a risk management perspective. I know you've got a lot under your purview at Truist. Not that the merger hasn't been a beast in itself to tackle, but with this happening, walk us kind of through what you're experiencing on more of a broader view.
Sure. So as you mentioned, we're in the middle of a merger. We merged last December. So within a couple months, COVID hit, and this, the new normal, it hit, and it's been interesting from a couple of different perspectives. From a cultural perspective, ironically enough, I think it's actually been a blessing from my perspective. With a lot of mergers, you have some silos and things like that. Well, I'm in this building with these people that I've always worked with, and still have that us versus them perspective that you find in mergers. But honestly, within a couple months, that all went away because nobody was in the same place. So we were all on the same level playing field, and we were all looking at COVID and what was going on with the pandemic as a holistic unit. There was no heritage organization, here's how we did it, here's how you did it thing, because nobody had done it.
Sure.
And, banking in general is not exactly known for being front runner
Right.
in the risk space. We're a little risk adverse. So, when you talk about offshore users at third and fourth party vendors now going home and taking God knows what equipment to who knows where, that is something that we had to take a really hard look at, especially in the beginning. Say, what is critical operations? How are we going to protect this, particularly from a cyber perspective, and coming together as a task force to address that basically overnight. So while it's been challenging in the risk space, just dealing with all of the increased cyber risk and coordinating across a brand new bank, at the same time, culturally, it's been actually a blessing in my eyes.
Yeah, culturally is definitely a big topic. We certainly will tackle that. And I think a lot of people have said that there's been a difficult time unplugging, and I think we're going to talk about that as well.
Yes.
And fatigue that's associated with being at home and not knowing when to check out or unplug for quite a bit. Daniel, from a professional services perspective, you're talking to clients, you're talking to people that you're providing a service for, offensive, defensive security. Tell me, what are they saying? What are you hearing? What are some of their takeaways? Has everything been doom and gloom? Have things been positive? Has there been a mixture of both?
I think what I've been hearing a lot of is, what do we do now? There's a lot of things happening in the new normal, like with Christina was talking about, I'm sure Carl will address as well, where companies are adjusting their footing to their business operations, to their tempo, and just the way in which people are conducting business, conducting commerce, reliant parties, third parties, all of that's really changed. And a lot of potential clients and clients are coming and saying, what do we do now? What does this mean for the threat landscape? And I think that a lot of it is going to be playing out into the first, second, and third quarters of next year. I think people are really just trying to figure out where, how they're going to adapt to the ground shifting underneath their feet, and trying to see what that means for their security posture.
Yep. Excellent. So it's a good segue to Carl talking about defensive side of things and protecting an enterprise organization. Ahold Delhaize, big international footprint, obviously foreign owned. What you guys have taken on a pretty big, large scope of responsibility in your realm. Tell us about kind of what's your purview looks like now. Where do you see things shifting as we go forward? Have the priorities changed that much, or is it still a subset of missions that you've always had? It's just we're all in a different environment because we're working remote, or is it a blend of the two?
Yeah, so I'd like to touch a little bit on what Christina said earlier with the location boundaries just melted away. And culturally speaking, when you work in an international company, it's pretty easy to point at one city, one country, and have that negative conversation about other folks. I'll tell you, this has been, as Christina said, a blessing. It's been a really good opportunity for us to come together and be a single team. And what's really interesting, and I think everybody on this call knows this, we manage introverts, right? And so what better place to be than working from home in whatever basement you want to work in, or side office or whatever. So, as we look at this from a cyber defense standpoint, I'd say the team that I manage, the group that I manage, is just delivering so much right now. And some of it has to do with they don't have a commute time anymore, right? So what are these guys going to go do? Their favorite thing in the world, which is to go defend the company. And that's a pretty awesome, powerful situation to be in. Now, as we look at the new normal, and we talked about this, Daniel, a little bit when we got together in planning stage, threat intelligence has been huge for us. If we look around right now and we see all these large companies that are getting hit with ransomware, the medium size, the small company, I mean, everywhere you turn, someone's coming up with a ransomware attack, right? So we're leveraging as much threat intelligence as possible to get ahead of the curve.
Is that mostly done internally? Is that something you leverage external? Is it a combination of the two?
Yes, we do much
all the above.
internal. We have third parties that provide us with threat intelligence. We receive threat intelligence feeds. We have individuals both in Europe and the United States that are dedicated to gathering threat intelligence and putting it into a format that's actionable. And that's the key piece. Taking threat intelligence and injecting it into your defenses.
Excellent. Daniel, we talked about this. You actually brought it up initially, as Carl mentioned in our planning call. What have you seen from a professional services standpoint? I've heard a lot around threat intel as a service not really being a pretty hard market or being offered, I guess, in large scale. What have you seen from a professional services standpoint as it relates to threat intel and providing that type of intel for organizations?
So I think a lot of the traditional threat intelligence feeds are changing in the way in which we consume that data and what it actually means. Typically a lot of the different TTPs that attackers will use were predicated on how the threat intelligence was consumed and acted upon by the defending party or the companies. Now, the way that business has shifted with not only the transactional nature of the business, but the operational tempo of the business with the actual employees working in a different manner, not necessarily, certainly not in the office, very much more remote at different hours of the day, et cetera. That changes the whole landscape about how you actually consume that threat intelligence and what it actually means. And that translates into into new and more threatening ways that attackers are using their TTPs. I think there was actually something that a colleague of mine just sent me recently about ransomware and a new tactic that some attackers are using, where they're actually taking the information and then threatening to leak intellectual property on a host of websites, and actually, contacting legitimate journalists and saying, this is what happened to this company's threat posture now that they've gone into a new, operational tempo, and here are their weaknesses. So it's really changed a lot of the TTPs that people are using and how they're consuming threat intelligence.
So are we still, for a long time, security and its function has been, a lot of organizations, especially without sophisticated postures, have been struggling to modernize and get out of a reactive state. Do you think this transition has allowed us to be a little bit more proactive, or has it uncovered some glaringly obvious opportunities to where you get to slow that down and really kind of laser focus in on a couple strategic or maybe even functional areas? And this is kind of more of a question for all three of you.
I think that's kind of a two-part question. I don't think that it's going to allow companies to slow down. Actually, they're going to have to shift their focus, and they're going to have to ramp it up. There's no question about that. I do think that it will shift their focus in terms of what they're trying to defend and what they're trying to defend against. I can tell you that it's opened up a wealth of opportunities for a company like CSRG, where we specialize in adversary simulation and emulation, and incident response planning. And it's we have a lot of different companies coming to us, like I said at the top of the call, asking us, well, what do we do now? Because we hadn't really thought about really trying to protect against some of the things that we're now having to protect against. So I don't think it's going to allow people to slow down. As a matter of fact, I think the spend from a professional services perspective is going to have to go up, or else you're going to start to see some of the impact into Q1 and Q2 of next year.
Yeah, good point. Good. Christina, Carl, either one of you, do you agree with that assessment in terms of increasing budgetary capabilities and spending more on professional services and trying to leverage those capabilities?
Well, I would say yes, from an expectations perspective. So where previously, things would take a couple months to do, we're being asked to do it in a matter of days. So, working with our partners internally, if you go back to PPP, which was the payment protection loans for people, the government put that out with very little guidance in a week or something. And we were one of the first, so I'll toot our horn. We were one of the first to get out there with automated solutions for businesses. And that took a massive internal effort, and really looking at our processes and saying, what's the MVP? What's the minimum viable product here that we need to do from a security and risk perspective, and execute, get it done tomorrow. I mean, we had a week to stand up whole websites, with private data and things like that at the behest of the government. We didn't really have choices here. So, and we knocked it out, and we got kudos for what we were able to deliver, and it turned out to be a success. And so I think we need to take those lessons learned and move forward and look at, how do we do things faster? How do we maintain our security posture, maintain our risk targets, and yet execute so much faster? Because once they see you do it once, that's the expectation.
Sure,
you can't go back to going, oh, it's going to take us 6 months to do that. They're like, but you did that one in 5 days.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got to balance that. But there's definitely a heightened focus. I've also seen, situations in the industry where, especially around third-party risk, around things where you're like, do you remember I told you we really needed to fix this section here? This is why. And so, you're going to see an uptick on those now that it really get home with the executives and things about, this is why we asked for this. And this is what could have happened, or could have been better, things like that. So we've got a lot more ammunition.
Yeah, so
whenever these things happen.
right. So in lieu of what's happening now, you're saying it's drawn more light to that. You're getting more
Yeah.
executive buy-in. There's more support behind it. Great. And Carl,
Absolutely.
for on the grocery side of things, I mean, I think supply chain, and I look at the complications related to supply chain, getting products from overseas, and some of the associated risks with that may or may not impact I guess the workforce. But as you look at professional services and engaging firms to help kind of bolster your position as an organization, is your focus, you mentioned in threat intel, incident response has been brought up a couple times, or do you feel like you all are being really good at trying to be more proactive and ahead of the curve? And how's that process unveiling so far?
And it's interesting with the grocery business, much like Christina, we saw a change in our business that happened overnight. How many people were ordering groceries online before March?
Yeah, right.
I could tell you a whole bunch were ordering online after March.
Yes.
That our e-commerce business, it didn't double, it didn't triple, it didn't quadruple, right? I mean, this thing just blew up. So we supported the rapid expansion of e-commerce, which is always interesting. You think it would be scalable and just grow, you add a couple servers on, but that's not really how that works.
Sure.
It was a lot of fun to dig in and roll up our sleeves. It's something that we put a lot of priority around. So, threat intel, obviously we want to keep the bad guys out. Our incident response piece, that's a whole nother beast, right? That didn't really change too much. We were already using third parties to augment what we do. But really that protection piece and to quickly support the change of direction by the business, we absolutely leaned on third parties. But our model is also third party based anyways.
Right. Yeah, excellent. And it's a good, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
No, I just want to add to what Carl's saying. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and one of the things, you couldn't be more spot on, Carl. There are plenty of businesses that, because of the new normal, are adapting to a completely different way of doing commerce. A lot of the wholesale food suppliers here, the restaurant suppliers, switched over to online ordering, and for those that wanted to order in larger bulk sizes, we're going ahead and dropping it off at your doorstep, when you could get 2 weeks worth of groceries from a restaurant wholesaler. And they very, very quickly switched into that, and that's fantastic. The problem is it opens up a whole new can of worms for people that weren't in companies that weren't in a position to actually operate in that manner. Now they're having to worry about security in a completely different way than they were accustomed to, because they're being forced into it. So I'm kind of putting my, emphasizing the point where I said before, where people are going to have to, start to consider their security posture much more rapidly than they would have had to previously. And, just also speaking to the incident response piece, a lot of the incident response plans are out the window. A lot of incident response plans required executives being in specific places at specific times, chain of command, decision-making, prior to decision-making. Now everyone's dispersed. And, those incident response plans, need to be refreshed. They need to be refreshed not only for new tactics, but they need to be refreshed for the defenders making decisions when things are happening on an hour-by-hour basis.
So you've seen an increase in companies wanting to put more of the focus on incident response planning, whether it be running certain types of tabletop exercises or the like, but just really just focusing more on, in the event something does happen, there's an event, here's how we manage it, and here's how the organization, focuses on business continuity, and here's how we plan accordingly. You're seeing a big uptick in that space. Carl, you mentioned that before. Daniel, it sounds like you're equivocally across the board seeing companies, both large and small, focusing on that.
And I'd like to add to Daniel's piece here real quick, and it just really puts a little bit of science behind what he said. We've done 3 cyber simulation events since COVID-19 has kicked off, to do exactly what Daniel was talking about, which is being prepared in this new world with people in different locations. We've executed one between Europe and the United States, and then we've had one with one of our business partners, and we've just done one internal to our cyber defense team to get ourselves right. We're going to run another one next month, and then we'll finish the year in December with another cyber sim. And it sounds like a lot, but if you keep them to 2 hours at a pop, it's really worthwhile, especially to write those playbooks, because they need to be rewritten, just like Daniel said.
In those exercises as of late, are you uncovering, are there a tremendous amount of findings or is it pretty much as expected during those recent exercises, without divulging too much information? But is it moving the needle, I guess?
Yeah. So when I look at a cyber simulation exercise, there better be lessons learned every time, right? That's the purpose of it. And while the first cyber simulation that we did it as just a cyber defense team, again, so we could get our playbooks right. And we found that there were absolutely some nuances about not being located near a data center or being so distributed, ensuring that we had a backup to Teams, Zoom, whatever platform you're using, WebEx. And then the rest has been taking that out to the rest of our business units to help them have the same epiphany that we had, which is our plan needed to be restructured.
Yeah, I
Excellent.
mean, I don't want to reveal too many tactics, but one of the glaringly obvious ones is some of the most obvious and effective ones are the ones that are the simplest, right? And it really comes in two parts: attack a company and then compromise their ability to communicate remotely. Right.
Yep.
Especially in the new normal, that's where it kind of all starts to unravel.
And I think you have to extend that also to business continuity. So, we all have a role to play there, particularly security and IT operations and things like that. In a lot of the cases, the business continuity plans assumed alternate sites. And so you've got the remote access for people that never had remote access before, and how do you operationalize that securely, and things like that, where we're starting to see scenarios where we just kind of drew the line and said, yeah, that's the likelihood of that happening is low. We're not going to invest in that space. We're not going to have a backup of 10,000 RSA tokens or things like that. That we can withdraw from. That wasn't our case, but for some companies it was. How many laptops can you get? Can you secure those laptops in time? Can you get all the security stuff on them? Do you have the appropriate images updated? All of those types of things where you've got to roll them out quickly, and you never anticipated that. Nobody ever anticipated all buildings need to be evacuated within India in 48 hours. Like, that was just not a thing. We thought about stuff, but we kind of went, if that's a problem, we got bigger problems to solve. So we kind of drew a line at some point and said, here's where we're going to spend our time, which was appropriate. It's a risk-based decision. But, I think we're having to move that line a little bit higher now, and take into account some of these things that we didn't take into account for. I applaud anybody that took into account global pandemic prior to last year and spent money on that. You can account for it, but did you spend money on it? Now we're going to spend money on it.
Yeah, it's not an incident until your general counsel calls you and says you have a breach.
Yes, right. Field day for insurance providers as well. So tell me, it's a good segue, talking about in the realm of people, processes, and technology. We did talk about initially in our planning discussion around efficiencies and using this as an opportunity to improve processes that are baked around certain tools and people that we have. And now that folks are more decentralized, and albeit some organizations were already set up for that, this has certainly accelerated that transition. Tell us about, from a third-party risk perspective, you mentioned due diligence with third parties. You mentioned a lot of process improvements. How does that impacting your world from a cyber risk perspective, Christina? And then certainly want to ask you, Daniel and Carl, what you see through your lens.
I think, from our perspective, we had a very strong third-party risk program, and we were actually in the middle of expanding that into fourth parties to do, alerting and things like that. So we were already well down the road. I'll say from an executive leadership perspective, we got to, show it off a little bit and, validate the investment that we had done up front. So that was very nice. I would say from a downside, we do on-site visits. So it's part of our program, Trust But Verify. We do on-site data center visits and things like that. So we're not able to do that this year. So we've had to make adjustments to the program and then communicate that risk around not being able to do those site visits and coming up with creative ways to work with the third parties and contracting and things like that. I think all the businesses really need to go back and look at their third party contracts and review them for this type of situation. And looking at them and saying, do we have pandemic options to be able to trigger, laying all those things out so that because it's going to happen again, I'm sure, in our lifetime, when it happens again, because once we've done this once, it's going to be, kind of a trigger again. So the next pandemic that comes out, is everything already laid out with the vendors, how this works? Are you doing that from the get-go? And so you don't have to come up with it in 24 hours, like most of us did. Going, okay, how do we deal with this? Everybody get in a room, we'll figure it out, virtual room. And, so I think there's a couple different things with vendors. You've got prepping it. You've got, are you continuing on your due diligence? If you didn't have a continuous monitoring program for your third parties, you need to be doing that now. I was lucky we were already down that road, but a lot of companies aren't, and they're not doing continuous monitoring. They might look at their vendors once a year, every 2 years, things like that. But if they don't have that threat intel service and they're not doing the continuous monitoring, they're not going to know when those vendors are breached. And then it comes right in through those pipes or other avenues from the threat vectors, and game over. You're looking at an incident. So there's a lot of different aspects to third party risk that it's a hot topic right now.
It is very.
For everybody.
Both Carl and Daniel are shaking their head and affirming that yes, this is very much a hot priority for us. Daniel, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Christina said that really resonates is having senior executives such as yourself being able to say, yes, I validated the investment. Pen tests are no longer good enough. Just doing scans across the network, no longer good enough. You need to be able to emulate specific targeted attacks that have been created as a result of the new situation that we're in, and being able to emulate those attacks and go down a predicted attack path that you've hardened your defenses around to say, yes, we're ready, is something that is an investment well spent. From my perspective, and certainly from senior executives that I've spoken to, it's no longer good enough to just say we're going to do a pen test a quarter and a couple tabletop exercises and we're done. That doesn't work anymore. You have to be extremely concerned, and Christina's spot on, extremely concerned about your secondary and your tertiary parties that comprise your supply chain. Because those attack vectors are now vulnerable.
Yeah, absolutely. Carl?
So I have a slightly different perspective because of my role. Christina, first of all, fantastic job with your third party and fourth party, nth party approach. That's pretty awesome. From our perspective on the cyber side, we immediately were pulled into situations where we were onboarding massive third-party entities to help us expand and work on supply chain and address e-commerce. And so there's something that's real interesting about that. We were a very traditional company where onboarding always occurred on site. You were going to get a laptop, you were going to get a token, you were going to be issued an ID. We were going to do the verification of who you are every day of the week. Well, that changed, right? So we had to rework some processes. We worked closely with our business partners to help them find ways to achieve the same level of we'll call due diligence for assuring that individuals are who they say they are.
Right.
using technology, using remote technology. So it was a bit of a fire drill along with some other fire drills all at the same time. It's part of Christina's program, right? At the end of the day, it's just one slice of it, one funnel. But it's been an interesting approach, and I highly recommend that we take these lessons learned and we inject them into our day-to-day business later, because it saves us time and money at the end.
Yeah, so are these opportunities, and I'm sure it's a rhetorical question, to drive more awareness throughout the organizations engaging the business? We know that there's more of there's obviously an enhanced risk right now. The threat landscape has changed. What's the business's role, or how have you included them as a result of what's happening, knowing that you can't really foster the same kind of relationships, especially with folks that are overseas? I mean, you can't hop on an airplane right now and go over to the Netherlands to meet with headquarters, Carl. And you have international operations or a client that you want to service, Daniel, and it's in a different country. So we have to do this virtually. So how is the communication being handled, and are there new programs or initiatives being led from a training perspective?
I think from my perspective, I've been pulled into more conversations than I can count about, okay, we're bringing on this new service right now. How do we do this securely? How do we talk about what we're doing today versus what we're going to do post-COVID, and what are all those scenarios? So I've actually seen, and not that they weren't before, but there was kind of a BAU process around engaging security and contract and vendor conversations and things like that. But I've seen definitely a more heightened awareness on the business side to engage with security directly. Like they're reaching out constantly versus just going through the normal processes. They're like, I know you have this normal process, but can you look at this, and just wanting that extra pair of eyes. And they're like, are you sure, is this okay? And really, they're really wanting to make sure they do that extra step of due diligence, because they know what's going on, and I think there's a lot more awareness for lay people outside of security around what are the implications, or at least more than there was before, and really wanting to engage and ensure that they're okay, and that they've checked the boxes, and that the vendor is approved, and we've done our due diligence, and that it's going to be okay. So
great.
Maybe heightened awareness.
Heightened, yeah, for sure. Carl, what are you seeing on the grocery side of things in retail and supply chain?
So I'll talk a little less about security and a little more about communications, which is a huge part of what we're here about anyways, right? Cyber is about getting the message across and talking to the right people. Since COVID has started, instead of going to India in person, we took a virtual tour of India. So we went to a third party. I won't name which one, but we as in the CIO, a handful of execs, we took a virtual tour. So they took us through their facility. They introduced us to the staff that work on some of our accounts. They even had an Indian food cooking which lasted a little over an hour. It looked fantastic. I do not have any of those spices in my house, right?
Awesome.
But it was something that we would have done in person. But instead, we took half days. So since we're in Europe and the United States, we started at 7 a.m. in the morning, and we finished around 11 a.m. every day. And of course, India comes into play, which is a whole nother time zone, which means, it might be 8, 9 o'clock at night by the time that they wrap up. But the tools that we're using are just like today, Zoom and Teams, and it just brings us together. It doesn't matter if we're in Belgium or Amsterdam, or if we're in Serbia or India or the US. We're all together and able to do some of those adventures. Now, I do miss, the after hours parties. Those are but it's the tools that are here today. We are so fortunate. 5 years ago, I think our businesses would have fell on their faces. It would have been a tough go doing what we're doing right now. But with Zoom and Teams, it's pretty achievable.
Yeah, I love the positive outlooks that everyone seems to have. There's so many silver linings, I guess, if you will, that are coming out of this new normal. I do want to segue to culture, because a lot of what we're talking about requires resources, requires people, requires budget. First of all, how are you checking in on your teams, and how's their headspace? We all can probably agree that the first 3, maybe 4 months, there was a surge in work, and we're all trying to figure out uh how to rearrange the deck furniture on the Titanic, maybe for some, and others was just, this is just the way it's going to be, but try your best to unplug by 5 or 6 o'clock at night and just be somewhat available after hours if need be. So what are you guys doing to stay close to them?
I have coffee time.
You have coffee time.
I have coffee time. So, the work is, to your point, it's very difficult to disconnect. I personally still struggle with that. I think I worked 14, 16 hours last few days, but, it's tough because you don't have something else to go to. I've worked from home in previous jobs, and you always had kids' sports practices or, whatever going on. But with COVID, you didn't have that. You were stuck in the house, so you might as well work. So people are just getting burned out and things like that. So, really encouraging with the teams during staffing calls that you need to have work-life balance. I don't care that you can't go anywhere. Still take the day off, do, list items around the house. I built myself a desk, just to do something else, right? I didn't like my desk, so I built myself a desk. Just to do something else and get myself out of my office and not work. But, being creative around things. I set up a once a week coffee time with Christina. And, if you don't drink coffee, you can bring tea, whatever. But
Right.
it's, 5 or 6 people on my staff at a time. It is a very small group. And, it's 8:30 on Monday morning, just kicking off the week. We sit around, we have our cup of coffee on video, and we don't have to talk about work. We talk about our kids. We talk about what's going on with the schools. It's just like we were sitting around the water cooler talk. And if they want to ask me a question, they can. It's completely skip level. I've
Sure.
got managers in there, but they're not the people that are in there. But it's a random 5 or 6 people from my staff of 75 or so. It's, just very intimate and having that opportunity. I think I've talked with colleagues across industries, and people are having happy hours, mocktails, cocktails, beer, whatever you want to bring. You want to bring a soda, it's all good, but we just sit around and chat and try to have that social time.
That's good. So it sounds like you've been very intentional. Been very intentional with it, which is right.
You've got to do it deliberately, because otherwise we all, to your point earlier, we're all introverts, myself included. We'll just sit there and work for 18 hours a day and only talk about work unless we make a conscious effort to do something else.
That's great. Carl, you mentioned something that what you guys were doing to have fun. Daniel, you mentioned something as well that you heard another company, one of your clients, doing. And so tell us about how you're keeping things fresh and keeping everybody engaged, aligned, productive, yet still balancing that line of hey, work satisfaction matters, mental health matters, right? So what are you doing at say Ahold Delhaize that's maybe different or more unique or maybe creative?
We're doing a handful of things, and we were pretty fortunate within the cyber defense organization. We were doing a daily stand-up before COVID-19 happened. So the team was already accustomed to seeing each other for 15 minutes, rapid shot, talk about any incidents, activities that have occurred the night before, any new threat intelligence has come in, and then, off we go to start our day. Now, within our larger program, which would include probably a lot of governance, think business interaction folks, that sort of thing. We bring together a couple of groups and we have a 15-minute inspirational moment. And what that is that members of the team all present something that is meaningful to them, to the group. And it's been really interesting. One person brought in some old comic strips, things that, I haven't seen in years, like Calvin and Hobbes, for example.
Yeah, right.
And ran through them for a fun moment. Another person talked about her grandfather and how he had overcome adversity during World War I, World War II era. And, you know, she brought in, you know, some of his actual journals and talked a little bit about it. That was really cool. And then, you know, this goes on. We had another person do a YouTube video that was like, it made you want to jump up and go run a marathon right afterwards, because it was so energetic and full of, you know, a good pep talk, right? So that 15 minutes brings all those people together. Everyone gets a turn, and we've learned a lot more about how we all think. It's really brought a human aspect to our team rather than just another robotic worker, right? Someone that we go to execute a pen test or a third-party assessment or to do incident response. You know, it's really a Bob, a Cindy, a Sally, a Jay, you know, and
right.
It's been good for the team.
That's great. That's good to hear. Daniel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm not quite as exciting because our team was virtual to begin with.
Right.
You know, that's the way that we operate. You know, you're in the business that we are. You're not going to your clients' offices. You're expected not even to be detected. So
Right.
you know, that's, you know, so for us, I think it's been good because you know, we've really, you know, kind of ingrained what we were already doing into things that you know, help you keep, you know, just a different tempo for your day. A colleague of mine, Steve Walker, is into road biking, and he actually helped get me into it. And so, you know, I'll take time during the day and I'll make, you know, a concerted effort to do those types of things. So it really, you know, I'm not quite as exciting in my response as Christina or Carl, because it's
Yeah, but
already been stuff that we're doing.
we've all touched on just the importance of balance, but also relationship building and how it's changed a bit, because, you know, we can't go to the happy hours together. We can't do this, we can't do that, but we're finding other ways to do it, and we're being very intentional about it. And so I think the big takeaway for everybody is, if you're not, figure out a way to lean into that and figure out a way that you can embed that into your culture. And I think it's going to go a long way. And that does segue perfectly to, you know, where people are still hiring talent, specifically in security and risk, and the hiring experience has changed. I know I could speak personally. I joined this organization a couple of months ago, and I've yet to meet anybody in person. And then, Christina, you told me a story about that. Carl, you did. Daniel, you're talking to people overseas that you haven't never met in person, and you guys are doing business. So, what is your take on the has it changed your approach to hiring? Has it opened up? Has it shed a different light on your approach to that? And tell me a little bit more about that experience thus far.
I think that, sorry, you
Go
go,
ahead,
Daniel.
Christina.
I'll be short. You know, I think I still like to meet people in person. I'll admit it. I do. You know, having teams overseas in the past and stuff, I would always try to make a concerted effort once a year to go see people, you know, just to build that relationship, because I always felt that made a huge difference, even just that one-time meet. But I have had to hire people, you know, in this environment. And you have to do stuff you're not comfortable with. I mean, you've just got to do it. And we've gone ahead and done that. I think generally for individuals, and this goes for hiring as well as everything else,
Sure.
that we are going to become more comfortable with things that we wouldn't have been comfortable with in the past. I would never have been comfortable with in the past hiring a direct report that I've not met in person.
Yep.
You know, but I was forced to, and so we're being forced to do things that we previously would not have done. And I think that's going to go from hiring to everything else. And we're going to see people's minds become a little more accustomed to things that they wouldn't do in the past.
Okay, good, really good input. Daniel, you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, if you know, I think it goes in both directions, Matt. It is requiring, you know, the remote nature of everything is requiring people to, you know, to interact in the way that we are. From my perspective, you know, and I know that it sounds somewhat cliche, but the biggest benefit that I have is the team that I've developed, and the relationships that I've developed with everyone that I work with. And you have to put in that much more cognizant effort to to interact with that person and to understand what they're doing and what they're feeling like that day, because you don't have that physical interaction. And I think when you're making that effort, in a lot of ways, you tend to get to know that person even more than you normally would have if you're just casually passing them in the hall or going to lunch with them or whatever, because you're having to be that much more deliberate about it. I think that it's also changing a lot from a professional services perspective in terms of companies being forced to consume professional services remotely. Previously there was, I spent a lot of time before I started CSRG in the management consulting world, and what management consultants do, they traveled Monday through Thursday or Monday through Friday, every single week, day in and day out, right? You get the elite status and all that fun stuff, but eventually the dust bunnies are the size of a bowling ball in your house because you're never home. I think that, from what it's changing in terms of the way professional services are consumed is, companies are becoming more and more acceptable in consuming professional services remotely. And it's not happening because anything is really particularly changing in the way that those services are delivered. It's just that now companies are actually having to operate that way internally. So it's bringing down, and it's bringing down that kind of that thought process and making it a little bit different.
Good stuff. Carl, we talked about the positives coming out of this transition and the new normal from, man, I don't have to worry about people being on site in Salisbury, North Carolina. For those that are on this webinar or not, or this meetup, are not going to probably know where that is, but it's not exactly in a tier 1 city, right? It's a little out there, right? So it actually presents an opportunity for organizations like yours to be able to capture talent from different geographic locations. And so while that may be a positive, there may be some drawbacks. Talk about both, if you would, for a minute.
Right. Well, I just hired a gentleman from the Seattle area, which was fantastic because I was able to reach outside of those geographical boundaries that I had before to find the right fit for the technical job that I had in place, right?
Right.
There is a bit of a challenge. The cost of living in Salisbury, North Carolina, which again, it's kind of like playing Where's Waldo in the state of North Carolina for city. But the cost of living is a lot lower. So when we go and we recruit someone from a Seattle, a San Francisco, a Los Angeles, a New York City, we have to compensate them appropriately to bring them on board. So the cost of the resource is going to be higher.
And I personally, from speaking from a workforce and talent management perspective, I see that being a big challenge that a lot of organizations, if they're smart, they're going to get in front of that and they're going to figure out ways to balance the scale and make it equitable. And then for others, they're going to be, trying to capture the talent, trying to hire A players are still going to be, there's a big delta from those markets to Salisbury, North Carolina, probably in excess of 25%, right? So it does present a little bit of a challenge, but I'm curious to see how organizations navigate those waters in the future. Look, we have 10 minutes left. I was, and feel free to jump in if you wanted to add anything, Christina, regarding that, but I think we probably have covered it for the most part. What do you think what is your prediction for the next 2 years? If you close your eyes and woke up 2 years from now, like, what is your prediction? And I'm going to ask individually your predictions for the next 2 years. It doesn't have to be 2, it could be 5, it could be this time next year, but what do you think is going to shift permanently going forward?
I would say, kind of going off of what I said before, is that things that we were uncomfortable with before, we will now become comfortable with. Because it was forced upon us. In many situations, organizations were hesitant to have remote workforce for certain services. Technology tends to be okay with that.
Right.
But in a lot of the business units and things like that, just generally, they're not okay with having remote workforces for certain things. And in industries like financial services, things like that, they're even more hesitant. I think you're just going to see a broadening of mindset. And it just basically what was this time last year it will not look like that. You know, people will have different models. Companies are moving out of New York City and into the suburbs. You know, being in a central location like that is not as attractive anymore.
Right.
You know, and all the things that we knew before, they're still the same, but we have a different perspective on it. You know, high rent and things like that, and commute times and everything that we all knew about before are just not as attractive from an organization perspective. So I just think that mindsets will change, and we'll just have different perspectives going into things like remote work.
Yeah, and you're going to probably see a hybrid, right, on-prem and off-prem going forward. Some organizations will be bullish on one end versus the other end of that spectrum. Carl, what do you think? You know, what's your prediction from 2 years from now?
Rapid adoption of cloud technology. Really, I see it's just moving so quickly, and it goes along with what Christina's outlining, right? She said, "Hey, look, sorry, my dog's in the background. This is part of that whole thing, right?" So it's interesting because it's costly to bring people together into that new skyrise, right? It's not as costly to have this workforce that's distributed. So the challenge for us from a cyber standpoint will be how to secure that workforce as they are remote. And then it'll also be, how do we track what success is for our own teams? And we need to do it in those areas that were uncomfortable before. The areas where we could look over and see that, you know, Bob's doing work because Bob's in his chair.
Right.
Those will be the challenges that are coming to us. Moving to the cloud, more work from home, and then getting comfortable as, and I'll say responsible as leaders for tracking work and getting it done in the new world.
Yeah, really good stuff. Love it. Daniel.
I can agree with both Christina and Carl more. I think Christina said it. It's simply not going to look like a year from now will not look like it did 12 months or even 16 months before that. With all that opportunity comes a lot of change, and with that change there is a vacuum, and there's good parts of that and that's bad parts of that. I think companies are going to be they're going to continue to be forced to be nimble in how they approach not only how they do business, because the laws of arbitrage will continue to apply and people will get ahead, just like what Carl mentioned before with companies that were previously selling groceries in a store are now probably selling a lot more of them online. And that creates new vulnerabilities, and it creates new opportunities for attackers. And I think people are just going to have to continuously not view their posture from what it looked like in March of this year. March of this year is irrelevant, and it's only going to continue to be that way.
Yeah, really good stuff. Yeah, I know we're bumping up against our time here. Is there anything that one of y'all wanted to add just in closing? Perhaps maybe a takeaway that you want the audience to take with them that perhaps hasn't been discussed, or anything you want to close with individually?
I think to wrap up what the three of us just said about the prediction, really goes back to the perimeter. We had this preconceived notion before that there was a perimeter around our networks.
Right.
And, our physical operations, our cyber operations, there was this boundary, right? That's gone. It's just gone. There is no perimeter anymore, right? To the cloud reference, Carl, that was perfect. There's so many vendors that rely on tapping back into their physical network to do the security monitoring and things like that. That's all got to shift to the cloud, because you can't rely on being connected to that network anymore. It needs to be autonomous and working with the cloud. So I think that the sense of perimeter is gone, and we have to account for that. So
that's great. Really good stuff. Well, everybody, I want to thank you all for joining. It's been a great hour, great conversation. Thank you all for your input. Really enjoyed the discussion. A lot of good things came out of this discussion. I'm confident that everybody took away a few things. I did want to make everyone aware that we do have an event on September 23rd. Our West Coast gang will be putting on a similar type meetup at 4 p.m. Pacific on September 23rd. Looking forward to that as well. Again, just wanted to make everyone aware. We'll have that information on our website here pretty soon. But again, thanks guys. Really appreciated it. If you have any questions, those of you that are attending, feel free to reach out to me offline. I'm happy to answer anything or direct communication elsewhere. All right, guys. Thanks again. Have a great day.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Matt.